we're back from the airfield now. We did a full day's ride in there, and although it was actually dry for most of the day, it's amazing the amount of that ends up on the bike. So we're back in the workshop now, and Alec's just going to talk us through exactly what we do with the bike after it's been ridden. Alec's my mechanic, and he's the crew chief of the team, and you're just pretty much every person in the team, aren't you, Alec?
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, without you, this ship would sink.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear. Yeah, basically, when a bike's been used, and as Taylor says, we were on an airfield, and they get dirt and grime and, you know, used at high speed. You know, calipers get a lot of brake dust, lots of debris and stones and things, so we've got to clean the pads, clean the pistons. Again, the forks take a hammering, so it's a case of getting all, you know, making sure there's no grit, no grime. Basically, just having the whole bike like you could eat your dinner off it. Working back, the radiator comes off. All the veins through the radiator get cleaned. If it gets full of muck and dust, it obviously reduces the cooling so the bike runs hot. Airbox comes off, air filter comes out, gets completely clean. There's some working elements in there that need to be kept clean. Obviously the front drive sprocket, we get a big build-up of chain lube, one of the dirtiest areas of the bike. So again, all the engines kept clean, the sprockets kept clean, all the seal at the back. We have the connector for the water pump down here, and importantly the electronic quick shifter. So all these operating and moving parts need to be kept immaculate. In round the back of the bike, again, we have the rear linkage for the suspension. This needs to be kept clean, continually greased so it all moves freely. Rear K-Tex shock comes out, gets stripped, spring off it, completely stripped and clean. There's threads on the top of the shock for adjustment. Again, we don't want any grit or grime in these threads when we're adjusting the preload on the rear spring. Swing arm comes out to enable us to clean the back of the engine in all round the swing arm. To make life easier, with the help of Hell Brake Lines, who sponsor us, we have what's called a dry brake for ease of maintenance and change. We can literally just unclip the brake line there, disconnect the rear wheel speed sensor, undo the bolts, and literally 5 minutes the whole swing arm's out. Again, it gets dirty all on the underside, so we can get the swing arm out and get the thing absolutely immaculate. Also, whilst it's down, we check everything on the exhaust system from front to back. They can suffer cracks with mileage. Everything fatigues on the bikes, so again it's a case of pulling it apart, stripping it, checking it basically every time the bike's been used for whatever purpose.
And how often do we swap things like brake pads and chains, and what's the mileage on things?
Certain things are mileaged. A chain will run for a maximum of 1000k, to be fair. Subaki chains, put them on new, we adjust them once and they never change. They're absolutely brilliant, but about 1000k on a chain. Same as this with the sprockets. Brake pads, down to rider. Some riders never use the rear brake. Some riders like Michael Rutter are never off the rear brake. So yeah, rear brake pads is down to rider use. Front brake pads we would generally use for free practice and qualifying, and we'll always put new pads in for morning warm up to bed them in ready for the race. So 1.5 to 2 sets of brake pads, front brake pads per weekend. Some circuits are harder on brakes than others. Thruxton's quite easy on brakes. Donington's really hard on brakes, but a couple of sets of brake pads per weekend. Exhausts, part is stainless steel, which is more durable, and part of it is titanium, which is less durable. So parts of the exhaust 2000k, and maybe the headers 3000k because they're stainless steel. And the rest of it generally, you're constantly checking your bracketry, your subframes. Your main thing obviously again is engine.
Yeah, how long do you do with one engine?
With regular maintenance throughout the season, basically oil and filters every race meeting, spark plugs 2,000 kilometres, and we would be looking at replacing or completely rebuilding an engine at 4,000 kilometres, which is actually pretty amazing. Back in the day, Hondas were 2,000 to 2,500 k. These things revving to 14.6, and we can comfortably run an engine to 4,000 kilometres race miles. So yeah, that is pretty amazing, to be fair. And
in an engine refresh, is it literally every single part that gets swapped?
It is, yeah. Yeah, your crank, you may get a little bit more life out of a crank, and your crank cases, give an inspection of the cases, but you're going to replace pistons, valves, piston rings, you know, main bearings, big end bearings, and you would strip your gearbox. Generally your higher gears, 4th, 5th and 6th, will be your better gears. You'll probably be replacing 1st to 3rd, 1st to 4th, and all your shims and your bearings in your gearbox you will rebuild. Again, clutches on a BMW, just amazing. We can get a ridiculous amount of starts out of a BMW clutch. They're pretty indestructible. But again, on a rebuild, you would replace your inner and outer clutch baskets as well as all your plates.
And on race weekends, do we carry engines with us, or do you just rely on one engine?
We do carry spare engines, just in case of, or you know, it could easily be a crash where a bike's gone down the road and hit a curb, and you may damage a crankcase. So, yeah, in that unfortunate situation, we do carry spare engines, you know, and change if we need to do.
And on race weekends, obviously sessions are quite close together sometimes, so we have like sub-assemblies built up. What sub-assemblies do you build?
Basically, we'll have a complete swing arm ready with a chain on it. That's the shock out of the bike. We will also have a spare shock there. As you can see, these are out of Michael's bike. You've got rut 1 and rut 2. So we'll have 2 shocks per rider. Rear subframes will be completely built up. If you want a little walk around the workshop, Taylor. Just to give you some idea. Complete exhaust systems ready. Swing arm completely built ready. Rear subframe, rain light, bracketry, clip, everything. So we can basically replace the back end in a matter of minutes. We'll also have a complete chassis prepped ready. Yeah, just in the spares box to give you an idea. We'll have brake lines, front brake master cylinder with fluid bled up, remote brake adjuster. So any problems with the braking system, you've a complete assembly ready to go directly on. Carrying on through the general spares, as you can see, we carry all this in the flight cases. We'll have radiators at hand, made up ready. That is a gear change with a quick shifter and all the electronics, completely made up with the bolt, ready to go on the bike as a unit. We could change that during a session. Again, in the event of a crash, we'll have things like handlebars made up with all the switch gear, the grips ready, the clutch lever. Just quicker and easier to change a complete sub-assembly on the bike.
And if worst case scenario, not that I've ever done this before, Alec, but if I was to completely destroy a motorbike, How fast could you build one from start to finish?
I think 3 hours, to be honest, with
Really?
with a super stock bike. If we had a complete disaster and we had to get a pre-prep chassis out of the truck, put an engine in, put a subframe on it, put a front end in it, wire the bike up, I think we could turn one round in 3 hours completely.
And that's the difference between having everything made up, ready to go.
Oh,
than
for
having to
sure,
build
yeah.
it.
I mean, you know, it's easy to carry spares like here. You know, there's clutch cables, there's rental handlebars, but the time involved just changing a handlebar, putting your levers and your switches on it, compared to having that ready as a complete unit, it's literally just top yoke off the bike and you can do both bars and all the sticky bits that get smashed off.
Yeah.
But, you know, every team's different. Some people on a much lower budget, they may not have time or the facilities to have things like this available, but you know, we're very lucky with the sponsors we have that we can compete at this level.
Yeah. And the bizarre thing about all of this is back in the day you could have 2 bikes sat there, whereas now we're not allowed 2 bikes, so you have to have a second bike in bits in boxes.
Yeah, back in the day, 2 bikes. That was great because anything happened to your first bike, your rider could come in, jump on his second bike. It was always aggro for the mechanics because whatever changes you did to the first bike, you had to have the second bike identical. So if you changed the fork springs in one, just in case, everything was done twice. It was twice the work for the mechanics. So good and bad with that. Massive saving in costs, people think, but not really, as you can see on the bench here. As for you this season, Taylor, we will build you 2 bikes.
Yeah.
You'll have your race bike. The second bike we will disassemble into 5/6 big components.
Yeah.
That if in the day we had a bad accident, we could prepare you a second bike for your next track session out.
Yeah.
As we did at Brands Hatch the first time you rode for us,
I
Taylor.
don't remember that.
Yes.
I don't think that ever happened.
I think you
We'll
crashed twice
I'll
that
cut
week.
this out.
Only 2 sets of forks in a weekend.
All right. Thank you very much, Alec. I really appreciate that. And I'm sure we're going to see you during the season lots of different times. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
All right.